Hello and welcome. This is Tony Neck from the Colour of Sound Institute. This is the new format for the webinars, and I hope you're going to enjoy this experience. What I'd like you to do, if you could, is just to type in. I see some of you are already here typing into the chat box. That'd be really great if you could do that. I'd like to just confirm that we can all use this facility. I can see what you're typing in. I'll also try typing in as well, and then you can see that I can interact in that way. So great, welcome anyway, and I'm really pleased you're here. So I can see from the screen that Susanna is saying, hello Tony, I have technical issues stating the video has been removed by the user. Oh dear. Is anybody else there? Let's just have a look and see. So if you could just type in a message, that would be great, just to see if you're there. But what we'll do anyway is that we'll be here and we'll be covering what is sound and how does it work in sound therapy. So that's going to be the main focus of the program tonight. Oh good, we've got a few people also typing in saying, Bonnie, saying hello Tony, glad to be here. That's great you're here, Bonnie. And Gwenalai saying hello Tony, and saying hi Tony, lovely to see you. Thank you. And Stefan saying hello everybody. So hopefully you can all see these messages that people are writing in. So I'll just say hello as well. So just to join in that chat. Great. So, and Fiona saying hi Tony, hi everyone. So great. So I think you can probably see that. I actually don't need to be reading out the messages, but it's great to know that you're here. So, well, here I am. I'm in my therapy room. So I'm sitting on the couch, and it's almost as if you're looking at me as if I'm the client. So I actually thought you might be interested to see what the room looks like. And before we get into the talk. So, well, just starting over there, you can see that hopefully that, I mean, that's where I generally sit. So that's where I sit and talk to the clients over here, and then you'll see that I've got a few devices that I work with as well. So these are scalar energy devices, essentially. And then I've got the sofa here. We've got a chart up on the wall, which is all about the meridians, actually a Touch for Health chart, the meridians, the acupuncture points, and all of that. So that's really helpful reference that I've got there. And then looking around, actually what this is resting on is the therapy bench. So there we go. And around that, you can see I've got like gongs and drums, and over there, a few more items like a handheld gong, a ring stick. And then over here, got a few bowls out that I use and tuning forks. So this was just all set up for the work I was doing today, in fact, with clients. So yeah, so there you go. So you kind of, you get a view of what my little room looks like. So as you can see, I mean, it's not a massive space, and hopefully this gives you some encouragement to feel a big room or anything like that to do this work. You just need a space, and it could be part of a room. It could be at the end of a room, and you know, and you could use it that way, just in your living room or an area that you've got set aside. So, is that interesting? And so, you know, please give me your feedback. You can type in your comments, you can share comments as you go along with each other. That'd be really good, because I really want this to become much more interactive than it has been in the past. This is a new format. We've got the live video, and then also I'll be able to go over to the desktop essentially and show you the slides. So I'll be able to talk you through the slides, and that'll be more interactive as well. So please do just type your comments in as you go along. If you've got any questions, I can pick them up as we go along too. Great. So what we're doing here is that this is essentially the start of a new program, a new series of these webinars for the Level 1 certificate in sound therapy. Excuse me, and we'll be running these webinars pretty much every month, and we'll come on to the dates of those later, but they're going to be a monthly webinar focusing on each of the modules in turn. over the course of the next 12 months. There's 12 modules altogether for the certificate in sound therapy. And oh, great. So Bonnie's also typed in saying, glad to see your space. It's very helpful to validate the way I have mine set up. Oh, that's really good. I'm just noticing some comments as we go along. So that's really good. So keep the comments coming in. That's great. Yeah, so we'll be doing these live webinars, and so hopefully it's working out for you so far. It looks like it is. It looks like you can see me okay. You can see the space. You can type in the comments. And so, of course, if you've got any questions about anything to do with sound therapy, maybe about a particular module, maybe some questions prompted by the talk that I give, or maybe they're questions prompted by what you've read or how you're practicing. So, you know, you can really use this opportunity to ask questions. And of course, what I know is that there are people on this course who, many people are either musicians or already existing healers, working perhaps with other modalities. And so you're wanting to learn how to integrate the sounds into your existing practice. Or else you might be a musician with an accomplished way of working, either with your instruments or with your voice, maybe as a singer, and you're looking to integrate some sound therapy into the broader work you do with music as well. And so what I'm saying is that a lot of people here, or maybe, you know, you're working more with electronic music as well, and that's absolutely fine. Perhaps as a DJ, or you're a recording artist as well, and you're wanting to mix in some sounds into that. Maybe you've got an interest in solfeggio or different kind of scales, maybe the not the A440, which is the concert pitch, but maybe another scale, 432 or such like. Maybe you've got an interest in Fibonacci. So some of these issues we're actually technically going to be covering in the diploma course, in the level 2 course. So things to do with gongs and tuning forks are technically part of that. But I'm very happy to be, you know, answering any questions as we go along about anything to do with sound therapy. So don't hold back, you know, send your questions in. I can check the chat box later as we go along and pick up anything there. And if I do miss it, just type the questions in again. So, yeah, oh, great. So Fiona's saying I'll be converting my garage to a studio. Well, that's fantastic. That'll create a really good space. Brilliant. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, as with everything to do with this way of working with sound therapy, it's important that we, you know, we kind of have an intimate relationship with ourselves at the start of any of these processes. So for me now, it feels as though that's important to do that. So I'm just going to take some deep breaths in. I'm actually feeling a little bit anxious about this because this is the first time I've used this format for webinars, this new platform, and so I wasn't quite sure how it would go, and I did a practice run earlier and seemed to sort out the problems, but I know we started a little late and I do apologize for that. So I'm feeling a little bit anxious and a little bit concerned about how it's going to go. So I just need to, for myself just now, also take in some deep breaths and just arrive, and maybe you could do that as well, is just join in, is to arrive fully into the present moment. Yeah. So we'll talk about this a bit more as we go along, even on this session, is how do we manage our state? And, you know, what are the really good states to be in order to give effective sound healing, sound therapy? So, and equally, you know, what is a good state to be in to be able to give a talk or to do some teaching about it? So these are all important aspects. And already I'm feeling more calm, more present, just from doing a few simple breathing relaxation exercise like that. Okay, so the talk will last about an hour, and what we'll do is to, you know, I'm going to run through it. I'll be saying once or twice as we go along have a little breather from it, and see if there's any comments or questions that we can pick up and answer those. And then we'll come back, and you can see me again, and we can answer any more questions. We can have like a chat then as well. So that's the way it's going to work. So yeah, so I hope you enjoy the talk. What I'll do in a minute is I'll just have to click a few buttons to put it onto the desktop view so you can see the slideshow, and then we'll get going with that. So thank you again for joining us, and please stay, and I hope you enjoy the talk. Okay, so this is the talk about what is sound, how does it work for healing and spiritual awakening. And there'll be a time for questions and answers at the end of the talk. So my name is Tony Neck. I'm the principal of the Colour of Sound Institute. So welcome, hope you enjoy this talk. And it'd be interesting to notice, in fact, that I was born, I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a potted history about myself, so you got a bit of an idea about where I come from and how I've got into working with sounds and healing more generally. So yeah, I was actually born and brought up in Malawi in Southeast Africa, and initially went to school there, but when I was about 10, I was sent into a boarding school in England, and firstly it was in Sussex, and then I moved to the secondary school, the secondary level, Downside Abbey and School, which is in Somerset in the southwest of England. And the key thing about this is that it is actually an abbey that is run by Catholic Benedictine monks. And what was significant about that for me, one of the significant things for me, was that these monks have a great reputation for practicing and singing Gregorian chant as part of their liturgy, part of their process. And they would spend hours a day doing this. And so I was very fortunate to be introduced to Gregorian chant by them, and to be in the abbey, to hear them chanting, singing the Gregorian chants, for me was a sublime experience, and is something that touched my heart, touched my soul, touched my spirit, you might say. Yeah, it kind of really kindled my yearning and desire to have an intimate connection with God, you could say. So it was a very significant time of my life, and the monks took me in a little bit, and they also invited me to join in with the school choir, and part of what we did there was to learn and practice singing these Gregorian chants. So that was a very wonderful opportunity that I had, and I treasure it and value it very much. And although I'm no longer really in that kind of environment and singing Gregorian chants in that way with monks, it's something that kindled a love of music and a love of singing, a love of kind of sacred music, you could say, as well. And then when I went to the University of Edinburgh, and I was introduced there to some Tibetan monks, Tibetan lamas, and then I got involved for about a year and a half, 2 years while I was at university there. I got involved in a Tibetan Buddhist group, and we practiced as part of that. We practiced chanting mantras, both out loud and more silently on our breath, and then reciting them in our mind. And I would go on retreats and so on, and we would do this for long periods of time. And then there'd be the silence at the end of the mantra chanting. And this was a very profound experience for me as well. And I think, again, in that, I was introduced very fortunately at a young age to the power of mantras, which is a bit different from the way of chanting the Gregorian chants or singing the Gregorian chants, although some of this was sung, the mantra work was sung. And so again, another very highly significant and powerful introduction to the power of mantra for me. And that stayed with me, and in fact it's something that I do work with a lot more now, because I continued on with the Buddhist tradition and have been with many teachers and a lot more retreats since then. So it's been very much part of my life. And I think I'm a bit unusual in that I don't regard myself as being in any way like a fundamentalist Buddhist, because I'm actually very open to holding on to more of my connection with Jesus and the Christian faith as well, but more the mystical aspect of that, and appreciating the value of more the inner mystical aspects of most of the world's religions and spiritual traditions, and of course the modern mystics as well. So it's very much part of my life. So, but that actually led me to get involved in studying initially Chinese medicine, Oriental medicine, and I qualified with a diploma in Shiatsu and Oriental medicine. So Shiatsu, acupressure, acupuncture was kind of, I was taught by acupuncturists, and so that was a very significant thing. And then I set up in practice initially after 1991, or at the end of that, as a Shiatsu therapist, and I've studied and practiced Shiatsu for many years. But then I began to appreciate the benefits of dealing effectively or working effectively with the way people talk, and what happens when in all that kind of conversation that we have with clients at the beginning and end and even during the sessions, and began to see that as being especially important. And also how the beliefs and the attitudes and the frames that people bring with them into, it's very much an important part of what needs to be healed, because a lot of these beliefs and so on are subconscious or unconscious, and they kind of emerge in the process of working therapeutically with people. They need to be dealt with effectively. And so I trained as a coach with the International Society of Neurosemantics, and started integrating health and wellness coaching into what I do. And then, more recently, I then got involved and studying sacred sound therapy, as it was called initially, with the Color of Sound Institute, and got a practitioner level certificate in 2008. And then, practiced for a while as a sound therapist. And then I was invited by Rachel Burnett, who was running the Color of Sound Institute at the time, to get involved in becoming a teacher. And then, so I started training and doing all of that, and became the sound therapy teacher. And then in 2010, I took over as the principal of the Color of Sound Institute, and Rachel kind of retired from it. And so it's important to know, though, that this institute has been going since 2003, so it's over 10 years old now. And we are an independent school accredited by the British Complementary Medicine Association. So this is very much what we're doing here. It's very much an integration of mind, body, spirit work. It's a very holistic approach to working with sounds. By integral, I'm really referring here to the work of Ken Wilber and many others in the Integral Institute in the States. So I've studied with Ken Wilber for many years, and also many of the other people connected with him in that institute, dating back to the 1980s. And so my kind of perspective is very influenced by that approach. If you haven't come across it, I'd suggest you check it out. But essentially, what we need to recognize under that approach is that what we deal with is that people have and operate from different states of being, in their waking state and in their sleeping state. We have all these different states, and we can work with that in an intentional way. We can work both with the interior aspects of our being, as well as the more collective aspects, the things that we share together. And so this is an important thing, because we need to recognize that in the process of healing and therapy, it's not just what happens in the therapeutic space, in the one-to-one work, or even in that's important. It's what happens to people when they go out of the space that's also perhaps equally important. So what's the support network they've got? Family and friends, are they members of any group? What can we do with ourselves, with groups, with sound bars, with other kinds of sound-related activities that we do where we can bring people together in our community and maybe some of our clients into more that group space. That's equally important. So that gives you a flavour of what we mean by integral and also why it's valuable and important here. So as the Colour of Sound Institute, we do run a whole kind of workshop program. Some of that is just people come along just for their own personal development, their personal healing journey. Some people do it as part of professional training, so up to the diploma level through the workshops. It's very much about practical hands-on teaching and experience covering this whole range of instruments and our voice. And so that's becoming increasingly popular. And we're running those mostly in the UK and Ireland, although open to invitations elsewhere. And then, of course, there's this online journey that you're taking now and that other people take. So this involves videos, audios, ebooks, workbooks, teleseminars. And there's also the personal coaching and mentoring that you can take advantage of. So you can set up these one-to-one Skype-based sessions with me if you want, and that can enhance the whole journey as well. So all of this is designed to help you discover how music and sounds enable you to create more balance and harmony in your life and also for the lives of others. It can help you and others feel less stressed and more relaxed. It can help you to have more energy and vitality. It can unleash your creative spirit, expand your consciousness, and raise your personal and also, you could say, planetary vibrations to enable a flourishing of peace and happiness on the planet. But it can also extend your journey towards greater health, wellness, and a full spiritual awakening. And so there's a way of working with sounds and music, but sounds in this context, both outer and inner sounds, which I'll touch on a little bit at the end of this webinar, which is all about spiritual awakening through sounds. That's the sacred element of this that I'll come back to at the end of this webinar. And some of you I know will be interested in that. So let's come back to that a bit later. So what we're going to cover then predominantly on this webinar is a little bit about what is sound, what is the nature of our universe, of our sonic universe, how is this all relevant to sound healing and this inner awakening process, and then, you know, a bit more detail about what is sound therapy, how does it work, and the next steps for you to take. So remembering that this is relating to module 1 of the Certificate in Sound Therapy course. So we're at the beginning here. This is a bit like the foundations that you need to know and appreciate and value. Even if you've been doing here and you've heard other talks as you go along, it's good to be reminded of this and to recognize that this is an important foundation that you can really grab hold of. So what is sound, therefore? Okay, so sound is a sequence of waves of pressure that propagate through compressible media like air and water. The sound waves are caused by the vibrations of objects and they radiate outwards from their source in all directions. So a vibrating object compresses the surrounding air or water molecules. I mean, it could also be that it's not just air and water. Sounds also travel through wood and through stone and, you know, through solid matter like that as well. But it travels most easily through air or water. So we're just talking about that in this context. So what happens there is that the molecules are squeezed closer together, and then it rarefies them, so it pulls them further apart. And so that's what happens. So that with the vibrating object. And so although the fluctuations in the air pressure travel outwards from the object, the air or water molecules themselves stay in the same position on average. So what's happening is that as the sound vibrations travel, it reflects off these molecules, these objects in its path, creating further disturbances in the surrounding air or water. And then when these changes in air or water pressure arrive in our ears, they vibrate essentially our eardrums, and nerve signals are sent to your brain, and these are interpreted as sound. So that's what we're meaning by audible sound. But of course, as we'll come back to later, we can also experience these vibrations, the changes in pressure, essentially, and the vibrations associated with them directly through the skin and into the body as well. So there's a way of experiencing sound vibrations directly through the body. So even if we're deaf, we're still affected by sound and other vibrations as well. So the way we're measuring sound, the way it's measured, is that it's essentially the key thing that we're often working here is the measurement and the number of cycles per second, or the international measurement is called Hertz, or Hz for short. So if we're imagining this wave-like form, as if it's a wave in the ocean, the top of the distance between the two tops of the waves is, and the number of times that's the cycle, is how it goes from the top of the wave to the bottom of the wave to the top of the wave again. So that's one cycle from the top to the top, and the number of those cycles per second is actually what we mean by the frequency. Now, although many people use this and see this in a two-dimensional form, and that's how it appears on a screen on a computer, for example, if you're looking at a sound file. But it's important to recognize that it's actually more like a raindrop falling on a pond. Or of course, when it rains, there's multiple drops falling on a pond. But if you just imagine one drop falling at a time, then what happens is that the raindrop falls onto the pond, and then there's this radiating circle of influence that happens. So the rippling effect, the raindrop causes this outward rippling effect in all directions. So it's not just even on the surface of the pond, but it's below and above as well. So it's more like a bubble, in fact, is a better way of seeing how sound travels from the source outwards. So it's more like a bubble rather than being even a two-dimensional, three-dimensional form. Okay, so as humans, we have a range of hearing for audible sound that is roughly from about 20 to 20,000 hertz. And of course, other mammals, other animals in particular, have their own audible hearing range, although it differs from ours. So an elephant can hear much lower frequencies down to about 5 hertz, but can't hear the high frequencies as much, up to 12,000 hertz. And of course, we know that the dolphins, as well as the whales, like a beluga whale, can hear much higher frequency sounds. So the dolphin's range is tremendous, from about 75 hertz up to 150,000 hertz. So it's nearly 10 times the range of ours. So they can communicate, and they do communicate with each other, and can hear frequencies that we would regard basically as being ultrasonic. And that's what we mean by ultrasound. So when you hear of medical devices and so on, medical treatments involving ultrasound, basically what that means is that sound that is over 20,000 hertz. And then when we're referring to infrasound, or sometimes called extra low frequency sound, that's below 20 hertz because we can't hear it. And so when we're talking about healing, with energetic medicine, energy healing, essentially, which is what we're part of here, there are these other types of frequencies that are we don't hear. They're inaudible, but it doesn't mean to say they don't exist. So it's just the same with color, for example. So there's quite a narrow dimension of what we see as the color spectrum in terms of the vibrational frequency there. But we know that there's also infrared, which is just outside our sight sense. But we know it exists because there are other instruments out there that have been devised to pick it up and to be able to even record infrared or heat, essentially. And so, yeah, so there are these other devices that can pick up and work with frequencies outside our audible range. And so just to put it into context, the lowest note on a standard piano is round about 27 hertz, and the highest note on a piano is just round about 4,000 hertz. So it's like in the lower end of this range of what we can hear. So often we can hear very high-pitched frequencies, much higher even than the highest note on a piano. So it's important to bear that in mind. So ultrasound, of course, is used for with pregnancy, looking at doing baby scans. And it's also quite interesting to note that the ears are actually the first sense organ to fully develop in the fetus. And starts about 16 weeks old, and then by 20 weeks it is fully developed and fully functioning. And so it is the first sense that we're accustomed to. And of course, the baby in the fetus hears all the sounds of the mother. Particularly the heartbeat is particularly important. And we'll come back to that a bit later on. But ultrasound is also used more therapeutically to break up kidney stones as well. So we know that sound is involved in very much in the whole process of Western allopathic medicine. And it's also increasingly, the infrasound is also increasingly being recognized and used. So this is the low frequency sound, and often associated with, in this case, there's something called infratonic therapy. This is a device I have actually, and it's a combination of low frequency sounds plus magnetic therapy as well. So this is based on work that's been done in China, in fact, and the research that's been done over there. It's been shown to be very effective, particularly for wound healing, bone fractures, and torn ligaments and sprained ankles and things like that. So sprains and fractures and wounds, it's very, very helpful for. And and so what they did as part of the research was to identify the frequencies that were being emitted from the palms of the hands of very experienced Qigong masters who are masterful in healing. And they found that frequencies being emitted from the hands of these Qigong masters are in this extra low frequency, this infrasound frequency range. And so these devices in China were developed on those principles as well, in a way to make that more accessible and more widespread than having the Qigong master available in every time. Okay, so what do we say? What do we mean, therefore, by what is sound healing? So sound healing has been widely used throughout the world for thousands of years. This is my kind of definition of it, you could say. So it's a form of vibrational medicine that helps to balance all aspects of your being: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. So relating to that is what we might call music medicine. So music is an art form whose medium is sound and silence. So that's quite a standard definition of music. But of course, it's structured in a way that is more complex than just working purely with sounds. And in sound therapy, what we're more concerned with is the quality of the tones of the sounds that we're working with. And we can be quite precise about this and work with this in a very conscious way. But there are elements of music which, and from music therapy that we can learn from. So rhythm is a key dimension of music. So it's been defined that rhythm, you could say, is medicine for the body. The melody aspect of music is medicine for the heart. The harmony involved in music and singing and with instruments is medicine for the soul. The silence aspect, the spaces between the notes, or beginning and end of, or even in the middle of music, is medicine for the mind. And the inner music, or the inner sounds, is medicine for the spirit. And so we can draw on this approach also with sound therapy too. So this is all based on the book Music Medicine, The Science and Spirit of Healing Yourself with Sound by Christine Stevens. And I find this a really helpful way of thinking about the different aspects of music and how we can integrate these different aspects into our practice. So clinical trials, so these are trials that I and others have done, show that sounds can help with all kinds of issues, all kinds of health challenges that people have, like sleep problems, insomnia, chronic pain, hearing difficulties, depression and anxieties, stress, high blood pressure, helping to speed up the recovery from major operations, and a lot more than that. So we'll come back to that in a bit more as we go along. And of course, there's a whole section on this later in the in this course as well, about the science of sound therapy and how does it work and all of that. We'll come back to that later. So how does this relate back to why is sound so significant? What is it that about sound that is, why is it so powerful as a healing modality? And it's because it actually relates back to the ultimate nature of our universe. Okay, and this is as described and as illustrated out of the adepts, the mystics, the masters from the past, with this from these ancient wisdom traditions, as well as through more modern mystics and more modern science, you could say. So Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, in the Taoist tradition, says that the Tao, which is otherwise known as the way, is the great tone. So he actually defines it as the great tone, the sound. And in Vedanta, the world is actually described as sound, Nada Brahma, in the Samgita Ratnakara. And so building on that, Ayurveda, the practice of healing with called Ayurveda, they have a whole way of working with sound where different parts of the body they recognize have their own sounds, and Ayurvedic practitioners do actually work and with the sounds relating to what they call the mantra purusha, which is the sound body, and use that as an integral part of their healing process. And so this is not just about working with the chakras, which we'll come on to later, but it's a much more widespread working with the sound there. Of course, in the Christian Bible, John 1:1-8, it's written that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so what we have from a whole variety of religions and traditions, spiritual traditions, and this is actually widespread throughout the world, not just in these ones, but much more widely spread, is this understanding or this perspective that, you know, there is a kind of like a source energy, a source of life, a source of everything that we know, that we see in this material world, out of which the sound emerges initially. These sound vibrations emerge, and then closely associated with that, the light emerges from the sound. So it's as if it's almost like a yin and yang from the source, from what lies behind form, what lies behind vibration. There's firstly a kind of like a sound vibration, and then closely followed and associated with that, light vibrations, and that this is out of these primordial yin-yang vibrations, sound and light, that the rest of the material world is formed. And so if that's the case, and then then we can work with that in a very powerful way. So again, within the Christian tradition, just building on the Bible there, Saint Hildegard from Bingen, and in a very well-known or very respected book that she wrote called A Feather on the Breath of God, she talks about the sounding word by which all things were created. So this is more of a modern, or actually it's more middle-aged saint mystic in the Christian tradition. And so from that book, I think it's a wonderful description of this, and I just wanted to read it for you. She says, "I, the highest and fiery power, have kindled every spark of life. I, the fiery life of divine essence, blazon the beauty of the fields, am a flame beyond the beauty of the meadows. I gleam in the waters, and I burn in the sun, moon, and stars. With every breeze, as with invisible life that contains everything, I awaken everything to life. The air lives by turning green and being in bloom. The waters flow as if they were alive. I am also reason, having the wind of the sounding word by which all things were created, and I breathe in them all so that none may die, because I am life." Wow, what a wonderful description for me about an experience of oneness, and appreciating the the central essence of that being related to sound. In the Sufi tradition, Hazrat Inayat Khan in the Mysticism of Sound and Music says, before its incarnation, the soul is sound, and it's for this reason that we love sound. And of course, in modern science, we get the understanding that all objects are made of energy. Each atom is unique because of the distribution of negative and positive charges coupled with its spin rate. This generates a specific vibration or frequency pattern. So this was from Bruce Lipton in The Biology of Belief. And then Donald Andrews in The Symphony of Life wrote that our universe is constructed not of matter but of music. The music of the universe is a cosmic symphony that embraces all the waves of sound, audible and inaudible, all the waves of light, visible and invisible, all the waves of gravity, felt and unfelt, and all the waves of atoms, explicit and implicit. So the idea from all this is that sound is essentially the fundamental nature of our reality. It's a vibrational form, and that every form has its own unique vibrational frequency. So we'll come back to the significance of this in just a little while as we progress through this talk. So alongside of all of this, there are a couple of what we might call new sciences that I think are really interesting and are throwing up some very interesting sort of information and pointers along the way that we can tap into here. So there's one called what you might call archaeoacoustics, and another that's about psychoacoustics, and often these get combined. So archaeoacoustics is the study from the past, relating often to finds that are buried in the ground or from the past, so like archaeology, combined with knowledge of acoustics. And psychoacoustics is knowledge of what happens psychologically or more specifically neurologically within the brain, and how that all relates to acoustics as well. So let's just explore that just for a couple of minutes and see how we get on. Now, actually, what I'd like to do is just, even before doing that, is just to check in and see what's going on with the webinar, and just seeing if anybody's got any comments. So no, it doesn't look like there's any new comments there as such. So that's good. And of course, if you just want to quickly write in any comments or questions just now while we're having a little break from the slides, then you can do that and we can pick them up. Otherwise, I'll just get going again. So hopefully this is interesting and useful to you, and is kind of what you expected. Some of you have maybe heard this or seen it before, and but hopefully there's some new content here as well for you, and it's also interesting and useful in that context too. Okay, so I'm not seeing any extra comments or questions just now, so I'll go back over to the slides back on the desktop and pick that up. Okay. Yeah, so we were talking about the archaeoacoustics and the psychoacoustics. So we know from archaeological work and so on, that, and also from the oral tradition, that sounds were an integral part of Aboriginal people throughout the world. So we know the so-called Aborigines in Australia have been, the indigenous people essentially from Australia, were working with sounds dating back 40,000 years. So this is a long, long tradition of sounds being an integral part of the human life story. And indeed, many of the indigenous people around the world, the Aboriginals, have shown and are still using sounds for healing and spiritual awakening as a way to connect themselves with the source energy, you could say. And we can explore this a bit more later on, but this is a long-standing practice. We know this from the archaeology. And then, of course, we have these sacred sites around the world, so such as Stonehenge in the UK. But of course, stone circles and stone objects are dating back, in this case, around about 5,000 years, are widespread throughout the world, in all continents. This is an example of where people have intuitively or through their own knowledge and wisdom have found that there are geographic places on the planet that seem to have heightened energy, and so they're called sacred sites, and then structures have been built around or on these places to, in a sense, amplify the energy. And so work has been done, acoustic work has been done in many of these places now to identify the acoustic properties of these structures on the sacred sites. And indeed it does show that sounds are picked up and amplified and sounded off the rocks, and indeed some of the rocks and stones themselves have can produce very significant tones of their own as well. So that's also really interesting. And some of the most detailed work has been done at the so-called Great Pyramids in Egypt, with a particular focus on the King's Chamber in the center of this Great Pyramid. So John Stuart Reid, for example, who is quite a well-known acoustic engineer, very interested in sounds and sound healing, and very involved in the cymoscope, which is a whole other topic of discussion. But anyway, he went in there and analyzed the acoustic properties of the King's Chamber. And further research has been done in other kinds of sites, such as the one at Newgrange in Ireland, and in other Long Barrows in other parts of Ireland and the UK. And they found that actually a lot of these places seem to have something in common, which is that the resonant frequency of these chambers, of these sites, is round about in the region of 110 to 120 hertz, which is quite a low sound. It's a bit like an A2 for those of you who are musicians. So it's in the second up octave, and on a piano. And but what has been shown, so this is something that typically could be chanted. It's the sounds that would typically be vocalized, so it could be chanted or toned anyway. And what's been found, this is where the psychoacoustics come in, is that the repetitive sounding of that frequency, around about 110 to 120 hertz, has a particularly strong effect on the temporal lobes of the brain, kind of just above the ears, on both sides, just above the ears. And that these in turn have been shown to be closely associated with so-called altered states of consciousness, whereby people would maybe have more clearer visions of themselves or of other aspects of their beings, and maybe connecting up with their higher self. And it also enables people to get into this kind of that kind of state much more easily, and so like a trance-like state. And so it seems as if perhaps these people had a real experience of being in these places of power, in these sacred sites. They designed the structures on these sites to amplify and to enable this kind of working with sound to take place. And then, we can only then guess what rituals, what kind of practices they would do in those more altered trance-like states. And of course, we know from living people around the world in the so-called shamanic cultures, how they work with these trance-like states, and how beneficial that can be for healing as well. And so we can draw on that knowledge and wisdom too. So, and of course we know, but again, this dates back thousands of years. We know that music in the West was starting to be used as medicine from Pythagoras, in fact. And he was the first person using the monochord to work out the ratios between the different notes, so-called intervals, and worked with that quite consciously with his group of followers, his students, to use that in a therapeutic way. And so we can also build on that experience as well, and that knowledge of how beneficial working with intervals can be, musical intervals can be for healing and therapy work. And we'll come on to that later too. So, and of course we have the whole traditions of working with sounds, and that have emerged out of India and Tibet, as well as the indigenous Americans and from Africa. In fact, all around the world, we've got these ancient wisdom cultures that have been working with sounds for healing and spiritual awakening for many thousands of years. So that's part of what we're drawing on here. So how does the sound therapy work? Well, there are a number of different aspects that I'm just going to touch on here. And then, of course, you can study this in more depth as you go along, partly in the related ebook that we have, and then also the references to other sources that you can, if you want to dive in more deeply, that you can pick up on and follow through in more depth as well. So, of course, there's the vibrational impact of the sound. So we've talked about that a little bit, and we'll just explore that a little bit more. There's the concept of sympathetic resonance. There's the understanding around the entrainment principles. There's the way sounds can be used to balance the two hemispheres of the brain and the beneficial effects of that. There's the way it can trigger the so-called relaxation response. That's very beneficial. And there's an aspect of sound that is more related to the intentionality as well, and the way we can work with intention alongside the sound. So we'll just touch on all of these things quite quickly just now. And then as we go through this course, then all of these will be expanded in much more depth, and you'll understand the significance and the value of it even more deeply as we go along. Okay, so in terms of the vibrational impact, let's just for a minute stop and remember what's happening in the ear and how do we hear the sound. So these vibrations that are emitted from the sound source, as we were talking about earlier, they do reach the ear. These vibrations, the sound vibrations, these frequencies come in through the ear canal. They then get into the ear drum. They vibrate hairs and they vibrate small bones in the ossicles in the inner ear, and all of this kind of excites the fluid. It's like the water that's in there, and then from that they get transferred into kind of like an electrical state that then gets picked up by the auditory nerves and relayed to the brain, and the brain interprets the signals, these electrical signals, and gives them meaning. And from there we can kind of label the sounds, we can analyze the sounds, but also that's more of a conscious process, but also most of what happens is done so-called unconsciously, and so the signals are picked up in the brain and relayed through the different aspects of initially the central nervous system, and then the peripheral nervous system, and then all the other aspects of the physical organ, physical system, and the way that works. So that's kind of physically what's happening there. But of course, as I said earlier, we're also can experience and feel the vibrations directly through the skin, through the tissue, into our body. And there is, in fact, a whole form of sound therapy called vibroacoustic therapy, where people sit in chairs or lie on beds, listen to music sometimes. But more importantly, there are these inducers, these loudspeakers essentially put into the structure of the chair or bed, and they send the vibrations directly into the body, so into the back, into the legs, into the neck and the head, and so on. And that's has a very particularly good for relaxation and encountering stress in that way. But of course, we can use things like many of the instruments we can put on the body or play off the body, and we can also work directly through the body in that way. So working, for example, with bowls on the body, with tuning forks on the body, with drums just off the body, all of these, the body experiences the vibrations very directly. And of course, there's the effect of the vibrations in the subtle energy, in the aura, on the chakras, and the meridians, and the points in the meridians, the acupuncture points in the meridians. all of these are affected by the vibrations of the sounds. And so we want to find a way of working with all of these different aspects, physically, subtle energy bodies, the aura, the meridians, the chakras, and so on. We can work with sounds in quite a way to influence all of these different systems. And knowing that actually what happens as the physical symptoms that we experience as ill health, so such as lower back pain or migraines, or maybe there's an organ malfunction, maybe a liver or a kidney or something like that, or heart, these kind of symptoms of disease or illness, pain and so on, are probably originally, it seems as though there's increasing evidence that there are patterns of imbalance in the subtle energy bodies, in the so-called aura, in the chakras, in the meridians, that perhaps happen first before they become manifest in the physical body, and that unless we correct these imbalances in the subtle energy body, then it's likely that the symptoms, the physical symptoms themselves, will not go away ultimately. So we've got to do the work in the subtle energy body to help to shift the symptoms, but also we can also work preventively to ensure that symptoms don't even emerge in the physical body as well, by working and correcting imbalances in the subtle energy body. So that's significant as well. And we can do this by working with sounds and also with color as well, and light energy, but that's subject to another matter. Okay, so also we know that the body is made up of about 60 to 70% water, running through the connective tissues, actually interpenetrating into all the molecules and the cells and so on. So and we know from the work that Masaru Emoto did, dating back to the 1990s and up until recently, unfortunately passed away last year, that the sounds have a big impact on the quality of the water. And so, for example, he did experiments with water where he looked at the effect of more harmonious music, so-called by Bach, for example, compared to heavy metal music, and was able to take these photographs of the crystalline, the frozen water, and could see the big difference in the quality of the water in that way. And so we know that as we're made up of water, the water influences actually right down. Hydration of DNA is particularly important and significant in terms of the functioning of DNA. So it goes really right down deep into our physicality. Water does. It's the water of life. And so the quality of the water, the energetic quality of that water, is extremely important and sensitive to sounds as well. So we can influence the quality of water too. So in terms of what do we mean by sympathetic resonance, I think it's important to recognize, just as I mentioned earlier, that every cell or every combination of cells, as in tissue or an organ, for example, in the body, or the whole person, has its own prime resonant frequency. So this is the frequency at which it naturally resonates. And at this frequency, this prime resonant frequency, this is when an object absorbs energy more readily, and therefore it kind of functions at its best, at its most efficient. And so therefore each component of the body has its own prime resonant frequency. So all the cells, all the organs, the bones and the tissues and so on. So just an example, it's been worked out that the prime resonant frequency of a whole person is in this range of 7 to 10 hertz. Now that's low frequency, that's the infra sound. Okay, that's below 20 hertz. So this is inaudible range. But that's actually a very interesting frequency, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. So that's the whole person. The prime resonant frequency of a heart is around about 100 hertz. So this is getting into the audible range. And a typical cell is round about 1,000 hertz. So we can see here that And then, of course, there are other frequencies for other parts of the body as well. But what we can see from this is that the prime resonant frequencies of most parts of the body are actually in the audible range of sound that we can hear. And so by working with these instruments and our voices and creating different types of frequencies as we play them and as we sing or chant, then, or tone, then we can be touching in on these prime resonant frequencies of different parts of our body. And it's like we can tune up our nervous system, we can tune up the cells, we can tune up the organs and the bones and the tissues and all of that in a way to bring it up into its prime resonant frequency, and then when it's there, for it to stay there and operate most efficiency. And so that kind of draws us on to this whole question of sympathetic resonance. So there's two aspects of this. One is what we call constructive interference. So this is when you get a resonant coupling taking place, which amplifies the energy. Okay, so this is when two frequencies can lock into phase. So one that's maybe slightly out of phase, and then you get a higher frequency coming in that then entrains and locks in to it. And so this is what's called constructive interference. So a resonant coupling takes place. So the two join together, and then you get an amplification effect happening. You can also have destructive interference, when it's almost like the two frequencies come in out of phase and they cancel each other out. And so when that happens, then there can be, so for example, if you've got the physical manifestation of this might be tight muscles, tight aching muscles, for example. And so by bringing in some frequencies that have this destructive interference, it cancels out the tightness, it cancels out the pain as a result of that. And then there's a release that happens. And so often this is what's happening with sympathetic resonance, is that there's an amplification of the positive and a cancelling out and release of the so-called negative. But those are just very relative terms. So there's also very much associated with this is a principle of entrainment that was originally found by Christian Huygens in 1656, where this was where he placed pendulum clocks around the room, and they all started off swinging and beating at different frequencies, different rates, and then after a period of time, usually a day or two, they would all start to swing, and they all entrained to themselves, and they all swung at the same frequency all the time. So that was how that was initially discovered. And so we know from the work of the Institute of Heart Mass, for example, that the heart is actually has a much higher electromagnetic field of influence than any other part of our body, for example. So it's much bigger, has a much stronger influence than our brain. And it's been shown that through various experiments that not only what happens, the level of coherence, heart rate variability or coherence in the heart has a big effect on not only the brain, what happens in the brain, but many other aspects of our physical and emotional and mental life. And so the heart is in itself has an entraining effect on these other aspects of our being, but also we can entrain the heart in ways that can enable it to have more coherence. And so by activating so-called positive qualities like love and gratitude and appreciation, then we can amplify the positive effect of the heart energy and the electromagnetic field of the heart. And that not only has a beneficial effect on ourselves, but also it radiates out and affects the heart field of other people around us. And so we can work with the energy of the heart in this way as a real starting point and a very important part of the sound therapy process as well. And we'll explore all this more as we go along as well. So just touching on it here. Okay, and of course we know, as mentioned earlier, about the babies in the womb being listening to the mother's heartbeat, and it's been shown by people like Don Campbell, for example, who wrote all about the Mozart effect and actually produced some music for babies based on this concept that the infants, small children, young children, will calm down when they hear music that's composed and played at 72 beats per minute. So this is the average heartbeat of a mother at rest. That's the average heartbeat that they would have picked up in the womb. And then when they hear music of that same structure, that same rhythm, then that calms them down. They get entrained into it. So that's really interesting. So we can work with that. So that's another important aspect of working with rhythms. And of course, we can actually directly entrain our brainwave frequencies. And so typically we're operating in the so-called waking zone, beta, 13 to 24 hertz, or some people say up to 30. And then below that, there's the so-called alpha zone brainwave frequencies, and theta and delta being the lowest. So we'll explore more of this later on as we go along. It's also covered in the ebook. But what we know is that in these alpha and theta zones, this is where it's especially good for relaxation, for healing, for creating kind of more trance-like states, and also in the delta state, which is often where we get into it in the more of a deep dreamless sleep state. This is especially good for regeneration of bodily tissue and bones and organs and so on. So, and through the process of binaural beats and monaural beats and isochronic tones, we can actually entrain the brain into these different brainwave states, into these different frequency zones, and so therefore work in a way to induce the healing effects. And also we can work with acoustic instruments to do this as well. So it's been shown, for example, that using a drum and then beating it at 3 or 4 beats per second, or even up to 5 beats per second, this has the effect of entraining the brain down into this alpha theta zone. So it's very good for healing. And then also what's significant is that at this frequency of around about 7.8 or 8 hertz on average, there's what's called a Schumann resonance. So this is the resonance, the normal resonance of what it's like on the surface of our planet Earth. And this is the resonance that's caused by essentially it's the electrical currents from lightning storms, but it creates this field that's between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere, which is about 85 kilometers up above us, and it's a frequency, or it's actually a set of frequencies that is caused by the difference between the positive and the negative charges in these different spheres, like on the planet and in the ionosphere. And it's continually maintained through these lightning strikes that are happening all around the world every second. And so what's interesting is that this is also in the same zone, 7.88 hertz. It was discovered by an Austrian, I believe, physicist called Dr. Schumann. So that's why it's called the Schumann resonance. And it's been found, again, you see that if we enter into this, if our brain waves and enter into that kind of state, which can be induced by drumming, like I was saying earlier, then what happens is that we're then in the more natural state of the prime resonant frequency of what it's like to live on the surface of the planet. And so this, in turn, we can get this synergistic effect happening between our own state of in our brainwave, in our nervous system and so on, what's happening with the prime frequency of the planet. And so we're in a much more natural state of being, out of which health and wellness emerges. So it's a very significant set of frequencies. And then earlier on, remember, we recognize that the prime resonant frequency of the body as a whole is roughly between 7 and 10 hertz. So again, very significant here. And so what we can do is also working with sounds. We can building on the work of Robert Monroe and Hemisync and so on, we can balance the left and right brain hemispheres. We can integrate the different parts of our being and then allow for greater integration, wholeness, and abilities to emerge. I'm aware that we need to probably press on a bit more quickly here, so I'm just going to quickly just run through what we mean by the relaxation response, known as this so-called physiological state of deep rest, because this is a very important part of sound healing and sound therapy, and one that I work with, probably one of the most significant parts, or because what we know is that this is a type of response that is triggered physically in the body, and was identified initially by Herbert Benson, as medical doctor in the 1970s. Now he's now professor at Harvard Medical School and director emeritus of the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine at the Massachusetts General Hospital. So this is somebody who is very much within the so-called establishment of the medical profession, and increasingly it's just recognized now in many hospitals and institutions of the mind-body connection now in medicine. And it's been shown by him initially and now widely recognized that stress is probably an underlying factor in something like 90% of a lot of the health challenges that we and others face throughout the world, but particularly in the so-called Western industrial countries, Western countries. And it's been shown that stress can lead to anxiety, depression, exacerbates a whole range of physical symptoms, illness, such as hypertension, diabetes, and accelerates aging. So these are some of the most common health challenges that people face throughout the world. And so it's the opposite to the so-called stress response, the flight or flight mechanism. And it affects the relaxation response that's triggered by, which we can trigger through using different instruments in certain ways, which we'll cover as we go along. That it affects the heart rate, the blood pressure, oxygen consumption, and brain activity. So fundamental processes in our physiology. And for example, in one peer-reviewed study published in May 2013, it was even identified with the way genes themselves express. And so that's involved with the way they express in relation to inflammation, energy metabolism, and the insulin secretion. This is all within one single session. So once that relaxation response is triggered, just in one session, can have this amazing knock-on effect throughout the whole physical, emotional, mental, mind, body, spirit of a person. So it's a very important part. So yeah, so stress, it can really help deal with so many different aspects of health challenges relating to stress, anxiety-related symptoms, such as palpitation, shortness of breath, headaches, gastrointestinal problems, skin problems, pain, sleep disorders, autoimmune disorders, mild, moderate depression, multiple sclerosis, fatigue, asthma-related symptoms, allergy-related symptoms. So these are all disorders, so-called disorders, complicated by stress. And so sound therapy, just like to summarize, it balances the aura, the chakras, the meridians. It tunes the frequencies of DNA, cells, tissues, organs, bones. It boosts the immune system. It activates and enhances our natural healing responses, and it triggers the relaxation system and reduces inflammation. So sound therapy is actually a pretty powerful way of working. But with all of this, we have to remember that ultimately, we are not the healers. We're just facilitators of our own or our clients' natural healing abilities. Our bodies and our minds and our spirits, and our emotions, we have this whole inbuilt mechanism for healing. And sometimes that just gets impaired a little bit or a lot. And so what we can do with sound healing and sound therapy is trigger the natural and enhance the natural healing responses that are already there. And so by activating that, the healing occurs. And so it's important that we don't become too egocentric about this and believe that we are amazing healers or any of that. You know, we're just facilitating this kind of response in others. And so that brings on to this final part around intention that was originally identified by Jonathan Goldman way back in the 1970s, but also drawing on the work of Stephen Halpern, his kind of friend and colleague. Stephen said that sound is the carrier of consciousness, and then Jonathan Goldman came up with this rather famous formula that frequency plus intention equals healing. And so, you know, the intention that we create in our minds is just as important as the frequencies we can create through our voice and the instruments in terms of this healing outcome. Now, I would say that alongside that, a real key or a real secret to the success with sound therapy is what I call love vibrations. And this is building on the work of Leonard Laskow, medical doctor, his work called Healing with Love, where I think if we add in much more explicitly this factor of love plus intention plus frequency, well, that's what brings about the healing. And in the love, we're talking about a form of love that's particularly unconditional love. It's not so much like the romantic love between lovers, but more this quality of acceptance. It's not necessarily sexual, but it's acceptance, it's non-discriminatory, it's this unconditional loving kindness is another way to describe it. And if we bring in that quality into our hearts, we're talking about the value of our heart energy earlier, and so we bring that into our heart, then and that quality of unconditional love, then that creates a foundational state from which healing can occur, that we can set the right intention, we can work with the frequencies, and that's a very powerful force for healing. So in that case, sound becomes the carrier of love. It's not just the carrier of consciousness, but it's the carrier of love. And then some people would say that actually it's the love vibrations, that's what is actually at the essence of the nature of life. And so by connecting with the quality of love, we can have this experience of ourselves as being not separate, but intimately interconnected with everything else in our universe. So that's what we're meaning by love vibrations. Now, we could take that even further, and I don't want to overwhelm you here, but many people have looked at what's the nature of more so-called miracle healing, and there are other dimensions to this. So we've mentioned the love and the intention, but if we actually look at other components of this, and we can work with these aspects much more consciously once we recognize the value of them, and we kind of dive into this even more deeply at the diploma level and level 2, and in the workshops and some of the other programs that I've got up and running now. But just to touch in on it, firstly, then we need to operate from a place of stillness. We need to create a connection of oneness, in a sense of unity with the source energy, with our higher selves within and without. We need to bring in this quality of unconditional love, set the right intention. There then needs to be a focusing of all of that energy and that intention, and that involves some concentration and focus. And then out of that, we can activate the quality of visualization. We can then bring in the frequencies with the sounds, and then there needs to be this final part here, this process of surrender, letting go. And if we can bring all of those different aspects into the process, then we've got conditions for healing, for real deep healing to occur. So that's kind of what the territory that we're going to be diving into on this course, particularly if you get into the more professional level 2 of this. And so that's kind of where we're going. So this is kind of what's important. Now, alongside that, there are various processes that we can recognize are significant in terms of the way that things go through this therapeutic process, through this healing process. And now I've devised this up into 6 stages of the healing process. I'm just going to outline them quickly now, and then again, this will all be expanded later on as we go along. So you could call them the 6 R's. So the first stage is, firstly, we need to encourage in our clients to relax into present moment awareness. And we've already talked about triggering the relaxation response, so that's important here. We then need to, stage 2 is about recognizing the pain, the illness, or the disease. So this is about accepting that it is really there. This is about facing it, This is about feeling the pain, feeling the discomfort, and so on. And then resonating actually with that, with the feelings and sensations in the body. So this is kind of where resonating in this sense is a bit more like where the love comes in. This is where we do this with this unconditional love, with this just this quality of acceptance of the way it is right now. How does it feel? What are the sensations in the body? And then from there, we can then, with our intention, we can look to release unhealthy patterns of pain, illness, and distress. And this can all be activated by the sounds and the frequencies. And we can reform new healthy patterns of ease, health, and wellness again with the frequencies, with the sounds. And then after that, finally, we need to activate this quality of being responsible, taking self-responsibility for appropriate action to maintain these healthy patterns. So that's a kind of a more general process that we work with here. And then finally, I just want to touch in on what we're calling the sounds for inner awakening, because for some people, this is also a very significant part of why they're following this course and why you're here, which is that it's about, ultimately, this is more the spiritual dimension, you could say. And I've called this now the sound of now. Okay, drawing on Eckhart Tolle's power of now, you could say. But and this was actually suggested to me by, as a phrase, by Kathy Edgar, who some of you know is one of the co-facilitators on many of our workshops and is particularly strong on working with the voice. And so she kind of channeled this and suggested it to me. It might be a really good phrase to use, the sound of now. And I think it is, because it's so much about, this is a gentle, simple practice as a way of listening to outer and inner sounds. It kind of draws very much on some of those dimensions I mentioned earlier, the stillness, the silence, focused present moment awareness. So these are various exercises and practices we can do in the sound of now to activate all of this. And then what we do is that ultimately they're practices to so-called hear or listen to the vibrations of our subtle energy body. And through that, we can connect with what's called, and has been called by many religions, and drawing on what we said earlier, to the sacred sound current. So these are the vibrations that connect us with our source energy. And so what we do with this way of inner listening, to the way of listening to these inner sounds, is that basically if you put your fingers, or maybe your first finger or your little finger actually into your ears to block out the outside sound. So don't do it just now while I'm talking, because you won't hear the instructions. But if you practice this afterwards, you can block out the sounds. So then you'll be able to listen to the sounds that are within. And some people, this is a real revelation. They kind of put it in there and they go, wow, I never realized that there's actually sounds in there. We're not just talking about the sounds of our tummy gurgling or the sounds of our heartbeat or whatever, but there'll be other sounds that are there. And so if you this is a practice that you need to develop over time, but if you listen to the first loud sound and just stay with that, then after a while, and you listen for it, there will be a quieter, more subtle sound behind it or beneath it or above it or whatever. And then so you can listen for that and then focus on that and then kind of allow that to emerge more fully. And then there'll be another one behind that and then another one. And what has been found by many mystics essentially is that these inner sacred sounds, they lead to an experience of the inner divine light. So there's this connection again between the sounds and the light. And ultimately, by following a practice like this, we can realize the true nature of who we are, and we can experience the calm, the peace, the joy, the freedom, and the sense of oneness that comes with that realization or that awakening. And in that sense, we can then live our lives and be of help to others most effectively. We can engage with process of sound healing and sound therapy most effectively if we do this kind of practice and if we get into that kind of way of being. So it's a way of doing the inner work with sounds that is especially valuable. Wow, we've covered a lot here, so we just need to move on. And Just wanted to say quickly that we're covering this in more depth next week, The Sound of Now. There's actually got a webinar at level 2 for the Diploma in Sound Therapy. So for those of you who are also doing the level 2 as well, then watch out for that one next week, because we're diving into this in much more detail there. And then we're now starting to run an 8-month program starting in March 2015, where we're going to be covering this in even more depth and doing a whole process around this, involving 3 weekend residential retreats in Oxfordshire, plus and followed up by one-to-one and group coaching. So it's going to be a very powerful process. And if you're interested in that, just send me an email to tony@colourofsound.org and ask for some more details, and I'll send it to you if you're interested in that Sound of Now 8-month program this year. There's also information on it on our website as well. So good. So just some quick orientation then, just to finish off. So this is the webinar for Module 1 of Level 1, Certificate in Sound Therapy. There are 12 modules in total on this certificate course. And you've got 12 months from the day you signed up, maximum, to complete the course. Although a lot of people do it much more quickly than that. So there are all these online resources in the members' website, ebooks, videos, audios, workbooks, webinar replays, and so on. So that's all there for you to access. And so please do take advantage of it. And what I suggest you do is that you work your way through this at roughly, 1 module per month. Of course, you can go more quickly. And we will be doing one of these live webinars every month. And I'm actually planning to do these on a Wednesday. That's roughly the second Wednesday of the month. It works out better for me in relation to the training I do at weekends. And so I'm more able to do this on a Wednesday, in fact, than a Monday or a Tuesday. So hopefully that would work for you as well. And so as a minimum aim, I should say aim to complete 1 module per month, including completing the workbook. And send me 1 or 2 of your completed workbooks for feedback. So I can say, yeah, if you carry on like this, you're up to scratch, you're up to the standard, and you're going to pass the exam, which you need to complete and submit at the end of the process. Yeah, so that's just about it. Finally, just to finish off, so read the ebook now if you haven't done so already for Module 1. Do the exercises for Module 1 in the workbook. Practice present being with sound. A lot of it is about developing that sensitivity to these outer and inner sounds. Which you can record what's happening for you in the sound therapy journal. You will be required to answer questions about that in the exam at the end, so please keep a journal. Complete all the exercises in Module 1 and send it to me if you want by the time of the next webinar in February. And then I think 1 or 2 people have recently sent me a workbook in like that for Module 1. So I will be replying to you in the next couple of days about that, getting that back to you. And of course, you can join our Colour of Sound Institute, our COSY Facebook friends group, which you'll be able to find on the in Facebook. If you haven't already joined that, you can send me an email or send me a friend request, and I'll put you in. So please do all of that. Now, whatever you do, remember, love what you do, make a difference, and help others with healing sounds today and tomorrow. Great. So thank you for listening in and being part of that. I'm now going to just come back to the video and take any questions that might be there. Hello again. Brilliant. So how was that? How was that? Yeah, hopefully that was interesting and useful. So some of you maybe heard that before, some of that before. Maybe you've watched a previous recording of an earlier teleseminar that I did that had some of that content. For some of you, it might be all new and useful, hopefully. So let me know your thoughts and feelings. So, put some comments in the chat box and ask any questions that you may have. I'm happy to be here, answer any questions. I realise that we're actually gone up to about an hour and a half, and I'm happy to stay here for as long as it takes for you to ask the questions and answer the questions. So, just going to drink up some water. Great, so there's a few comments coming through. So Stefan said, hi Susanna. Yeah, so you're liking this format. Fiona saying, thank you so much, Tony. Look forward to the next one. And Alina saying it was great. Thank you very much. Ah, so it's you're welcome, Stefan. Yeah, that's really good. So, Bonnie, like the new format, Susanna. So it looks like this is working well, actually, having a bit of, it's a bit more interactive, isn't it? I think this one. And then also what I'm finding is that by working with the, it's like the PowerPoint in the desktop, then it's also a bit more interactive as well. So that also helps, I think, to keep focused. So Susanna is making the point here. Gwendoline saying it was great, Tony, and this new way works very well. Brilliant. Ah, so it looks like we're onto something good here. So that's great. That's great. I'll keep it going. I think it is much better. Susanna saying, is it okay when the client falls asleep during the therapy and sleeps almost all the time throughout the therapy? Yeah, sure. That's absolutely fine, Susanna. Yeah, because as you saw earlier, what happens when people fall asleep is that their brain waves, the brainwave frequency slows down. It slows down alpha, theta, delta, perhaps. Maybe they won't get into delta through this, but it certainly slows down. And as they're sleeping, they're regenerating. They're perhaps, experiencing things in this so-called dreamlike state that can be very significant for them. And so, and of course, all these other things, these other effects that we're having. So generally, when people are asleep, then they're going to be very relaxed, and so they're triggering the relaxation response. So there's very many beneficial effects. So you don't need to worry about whether people are awake or asleep in this process. It's absolutely fine. Whatever happens is fine. Yeah. Deborah saying, great webinar, loved it. Thanks, Tony. Well, thank you, Deborah. It's really good. Saying, Susanna, one more question. Oh, it's the same one, just come back. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so hopefully that's answered the question there. Yeah, I mean, it happened to me, it's just today actually, I was working with a guy, and this was his first time that he'd experienced one-to-one sound therapy work. And he actually said, at the end we were talking, and he was saying, I nearly fell asleep in there, but I just caught myself, before really falling asleep. And I went, it was as if he had this view that, sleeping wasn't allowed, that, it wasn't a good thing. And I just said to him, look, just relax, if you feel like sleeping, that's fine. Next time you come back, if you want to sleep, that's absolutely great. You see, the other thing I just wanted to touch in on a bit more here is that one of the ways I think that sound therapy really works is that it has this, because of this whole process of sympathetic resonance in particular, where we're seeing through constructive interference, there's this amplification effect taking place, then what happens there is that it's almost like there's an amplification of what's happening at a cellular level and in the tissues and the bones and so on. And so with that, there's this kind of release of energy, this expanding energy, and there's also like an opening that takes place. And so what the effect that has is that it opens us up to expressing and to feeling our emotions more. And they get a whole range of emotions, both so-called negative and positive. But what that means is that maybe some of these emotions are linked in and they're connected to, maybe I'm pointing, say to my shoulder because maybe as it happens, I'm experiencing a little bit of ache and pain here. So just using that as a reference point, maybe some of these aches and pains and other symptoms of ill health are a result of blocked, stuck, repressed, suppressed emotions that maybe date back to our early childhood or from some time in the past. And so when these emotions get triggered and released through the process of sound therapy, then we can have a relationship with that. So even when we're falling asleep or when we are asleep, then things are being brought up into more of our conscious awareness as a result of that. So when we come out of the sleep, when we come through the relaxation, maybe we're in touch then with our emotional body in a new way, our emotions in a new way, and then we can allow that process to, through process of releasing and letting go and surrendering, we can integrate it much more into our nature of who we are, and then allow for the healing to occur from there. So that's also a benefit. So what's going on here? So Susanna's saying, I have 2 clients with tinnitus. Both were given 4 or 5 therapies. Tinnitus was reduced for a moment, but it came back with the same intensity as before. One of them lost it after the second therapy for a half day, especially from the sound of a drum, but it came back. What's your experience with clients having tinnitus, and is it curable? What would you recommend? I'm sort of losing the track of, there's something more there. To soothe tinnitus noise. Okay, so I've got that question. And then Bonnie's saying, how do you handle someone in a group situation that relaxes so well that they fall asleep and snore? Okay, I'll just deal with that one quickly, and then we'll come back to Susanna. So Bonnie, yeah, okay, interesting. I mean, it happens. It happens quite a lot, actually. And so actually these two kind of, there's going to be a relationship between my answers for both of these questions. So maybe it's good to talk with this one first. If somebody snores, then then it's a sign that they're deeply relaxed. So it's great for them, isn't it? And then so you're thinking, wow, this group sound healing sound bath is working really well for them because they're lovely, relaxed, and they're getting lots of benefit. And then you kind of go, and then the question is, yeah, but what effect is that having on others? And almost by implication, what's kind of involved is that we can have this judgment that the snoring noise is distracting, it's disturbing, it's unpleasant, and it's kind of disturbing to us if we're doing the sound bath, and upsetting the flow of the noise that we're creating, and it's maybe disturbing to others who are listening to the sound bath or experiencing that, and it's interfering with their positive experience, and particularly the ones that are immediately around them. And so we can create that kind of perspective, and that's quite a natural feeling. I mean, I feel that and aware of that. But actually, what I found in group sessions is that most people, even if they've got someone snoring next to them, their experience of the sound bath is actually really positive, even with the snoring sound there. And so there's something else going on here that's significant. And I think it's the fact that what happens in sound baths, as with all of these kind of practices, is that we can become, it's what we were talking about earlier, is about if we're activating the quality of this unconditional loving kindness and acceptance and non-judgment, then then we don't need to necessarily judge those sounds as being bad sounds and a source of annoyance. They can just allow to be there. We can just bring them into our present moment awareness and accept them and allow them to be there. Just as there are some times when I when I do workshops, and it's in it's close to a road, a busy road, and there's the sound of traffic that comes in. And we can kind of have a resistance to that and go, I just want to be in this nice, peaceful, retreat-like situation. And, I don't want to have this noise of the busy traffic there. And, you can kind of get all uptight about it. But actually, on another level, if you just say, okay, that's the sound there. I'm just going to treat it as pure sound. What does it actually sound like? And then it's almost like it can change from being this unpleasant, disturbing sound to something that sounds a bit like, it sounds a bit like the ocean waves just kind of coming in on the shore. And that's okay. So you can accept it. So falling asleep is okay. People snoring is okay. Just it's all about how we respond to that. That's important. So if we can bring in this quality of acceptance, of allowance, unconditional, non-judgment, then that's the important thing. And then we're in a really good state to carry on with the work that we do. So hopefully, Bonnie, that's useful. Now, when it comes to the tinnitus, yeah, sure, okay. So if we can, some of the sounds, some of the vibrations we can work with sound healing, sound therapy, can be very beneficial and can create long-lasting changes in the quality of tinnitus, the ringing in the ears. It's not just ringing, there could be a whole variety of sounds. And they can become much more permanent, in my experience, so not just half a day or a day. But you need to, so this involves a number of different things, Susanna. So if you can find some notes or frequencies that, or instruments that, or maybe it's the voice even, that seem to have an effect, or that do have an effect on the tinnitus, then that's something that you need to work with more regularly and more frequently in order to bring about a greater change. Okay, so it might be that you want to do this, you know, certainly once a week, if not twice a week, if not once a day, if not a few times a day. So now, of course, you're not going to have somebody coming to see you, you know, 3 or 4 times a day, for example, or even once a day, probably. And so this is where we need to encourage people to take into their own hands their own self-responsibility for dealing with their condition. And so we can be encouraging them to use these instruments, creating their own frequencies that are beneficial for them. And maybe they buy a drum, or they buy a singing bowl, or whatever it is, or they use their voice in a particular way to have an effect. And then alongside that, they can also be using many of these qualities that I've just outlined with the intention, just keeping it simple, the loving kindness and acceptance, the intention, and working with their, you know, their emotional body to release whatever comes up. Then they can be doing that on a daily basis as well, alongside working with the frequencies and the sounds. And so I think it's the combination of you being the facilitator, them coming to you as frequently as they can, but then you giving them the tools and resources for them to work with this for themselves. And it's through that process that the deep healing occurs over time. And it might take some time. Sometimes it can be just like that and healed up instantly. And that's like a miracle. And that is amazing when it happens, and it does happen. But mostly it's a slow process, and it works best when they're involved in their own process of change. That's one side of it, right? The other side of it is that, and this has been widely recognized by people who do this kind of inner sound work, the sound of now, okay, is that they recognize that the so-called ringing in the ears, these sounds that people hear, are there. You know, this is present, and a lot of people have this, okay? But it's almost like saying, you see, if you have this view that every health challenge that we experience, or people experience, our clients experience, it's a wake-up call. And that's what it is. We're out of balance, we're out of tune, there's parts of our being that are not in harmony anymore. And it's a wake-up call to wake up to the true nature of who we are, to break this illusion of separateness and to come back into harmony, into that sense of oneness again. And so whatever it is, even if it's around a heart complaint, a heart attack, a stroke, you know, whatever the you know, autoimmune disorder, chronic fatigue, whatever it might be, it's that call to enter into an intimate relationship, a more intimate relationship with ourselves, and you could say with our source, with our highest self, with the divine. And so it is with tinnitus. Now, what's particularly significant here is that we could say that this is almost like the sound calling us to enter into this working with the inner sound. And so what we can do with this sound of now, with this inner sound work, is that we can actually, by putting the fingers in our ears, when we do that and we've got the tinnitus, then we're going to hear that ringing in our ears. It's going to be there. But if we kind of, instead of resisting it and pushing it away and kind of denying it because it's irritating and it's upsetting and it's disturbing our sleep and it's causing us all kinds of fatigue problems, whatever else it might be, instead of doing that, we just listen to it, and we try and we listen for a sound behind that loud ringing sound, for example, then what does that take us? And where does that go? And the more we practice, this is what people find. I mean, I've never experienced tinnitus, so I haven't got this personally, but I've seen other people do this, and it's, you know, it's written about, you know, talked about in these kind of more mystical circles, is that when you do that, the tinnitus becomes almost like it's diminishes, it goes away, and it's no longer relevant as a challenge, as a health complaint. So that's another dimension there. So hopefully that's useful to you, Susanna. So of course you could be encouraging people with tinnitus to dive into this kind of sound of now work as a way to deal with it. And of course with tinnitus and all of these things, what I'd say is that it's really good to, with pain as well, or just the discomfort that goes with any kind of health challenge, is to calibrate it, okay, so that if somebody's coming to you and with a challenge, so it's like it's tinnitus, you say, if you can imagine, visualize and remember the worst tinnitus ringing in the ears you've experienced, and call that, level 10, and absence of any of these symptoms is 0, so you've got the scale of 0 to 10, where is it just now, at any point in time, and at the start of a therapy session, at the end of a therapy session, so you can track, and between from one session to another, you can track how's it going. And so often you find that, start of a session it might be an 8, end of a session it might be a 4, 3 weeks on it might start at a 6, and then it's down to a 2 at the end of the session, and it starts to just drop away. And now usually people who've got tinnitus and they've been finding it disturbing, they've been up at 8, 9, 10, if they can get down to like a 2 or a 3, and that's their permanent condition, so it's still there, but it's much lower than it was at the beginning, that's a great result. So you haven't totally it hasn't totally gone away, but it's much less, and so therefore that's much more bearable and there's less impact. And then they're actually probably in a much better state to start doing this kind of inner work as well. So it's worth calibrating with all of this stuff, calibrating, benchmarking is another word for it, benchmarking, tracking progress in that way. I think it's really good to do that. Yeah, okay, so Bonnie had made this comment earlier on about saying thank you. I hadn't thought of it as compared to outside noise, which we often have, and which normally no one hears enough to disturb them. So it's a nice shift in perspective. Oh, that's great, Bonnie. I'm glad you enjoyed that or found that useful. And Susanna saying, thank you, Tony, so much. It was very helpful, interesting, and pleasant. Looking forward to the next webinar. Love to you all. Great. Okay, so people are starting to log off, which is expected because we've been going quite a while. And but if you've got any more questions, comments, please make them now. Otherwise, we'll just call it, stop the broadcast, and look forward to the next one. I'm just going to take a little sip of water again. Actually, what would be really interesting, because I can see there's a few people still here, is I'd quite like to, because I haven't used this system before, so I don't know what the quality of, I know that these systems are optimized for voice, for people speaking, and so this is fine, and I'm sure that if I use my voice as in a chant, for example, a mantra chant or something like that, you'd probably hear that, or toning even, you'd probably hear that quite well. And so I might just do that in a minute. But what I'd be really interested in is your feedback on what other instruments sounds like, because I could use these sessions even more interactively to do some kind of demonstrations or demonstrate some techniques of the instruments and so on. And that might be really helpful and useful, because we didn't have that facility before with the last system. We just had like the slideshow. So if I was to do a talk, I think the next one is about crystal singing bowls. So if I was to get a crystal singing bowl just now, you could give me some feedback just in your comments. And Fiona's saying thanks, absolutely brilliant. So I would really welcome this, because if it sounds rubbish, then there's no point in trying to do anything with the sounds of these instruments, although I could still demonstrate some of the techniques this way with the video like we've got here. But if the sound is good, then then that could be really useful. Okay, so yeah, so Stefan's saying very interesting answers. Acceptance and love is all we need. It is, Stefan. Yeah. So Bonnie's saying it'd be awesome. Let me just do it. I'm just going to grab a bottle. actually one of these specialist quartz crystal singing bowls. So this is infused with amethyst. So here we go. Okay, so just imagine I'm giving you a demonstration here. So what we can do with a crystal singing bowl is we can play it by tapping it. And then we can play it around the room. What does that sound like? Yeah. I mean, I can see actually while I'm doing the recording that there's the mic that I'm using is showing me the volume of it, and I noticed when I was playing around the rim that it was almost as if the volume, although I could hear the sound here quite loud, that it's like that cut out a little bit. It didn't show up on the mic recording here, so I have a feeling that maybe you didn't hear the sound so well. But tapping it like this seems to create quite a good sound. Oh, okay, so it sounds good. Or the sound is okay. It changed a bit, but it's okay. Okay. Not bad, but there are other sounds as well. It's a bit fuzzy. That might be the sound of the computer too, because there's picking up maybe on that. Okay, what about, I think there's a comment here on, I had a bit of wavering perhaps. Yeah, okay. Look, I really want you to be honest. You know, if it sounds awful, just tell me. You know, I just want people to be honest here. Demonstrations would be great. That would really add to the content, as most of us would have watched the recorded webinar. Questions and answer ops is awesome, and seeing your demonstration really adds value. Okay, that's Fiona saying that. That's really good. And so I'm just sorry about me peering down here. It's just I'm looking at the screen, the chat box there. That's what's going on. Bonnie was saying, I'd like to hear more on how to get an accurate key reading on bowls I already have. I use a tuner, but it fluctuates. Would like to know how, at what point do I know the proper key of the bowl? Well, all right, okay, great question. I've got various tuners and things here, so, but I haven't got one with me. I'll have to go out the room to get it, but I can still talk about the principle, Bonnie. I'll come and do that in just a minute. This is great questions. Yeah, okay, so Anne was saying it sounds good, but it doesn't seem to carry the sustain. Yeah, that's what I thought. It seemed to die out a bit, really. There's a gate somewhere in the signal chain, so the ringing of the bowl cuts away pretty fast. Yeah, that's what I thought, but otherwise the sound is okay. So it's the sustain sound. That's a very technical answer, Stefan. I know you're an audio engineer, so that was a great way of putting it. Susanna saying, excellent, maybe if you hold it closer to your body, further from the computer. Okay, I can try that. And Fiona saying, I think the sound is okay. Gonging the bowl, great. Playing around the rim, faded out very fast. But talking about the technique is still brilliant. Yeah, okay, so that's that. Let's just try it on the Tibetan bowl then, okay? So let me just try that because this is a more complex sound. So let's just see what's going on there. There's more comments coming in. Bonnie asked really good questions. Okay, here we go with this Tibetan bowl. Okay, I think it's died. If I hold it further away, that was one of the suggestions. No. I'm going to bring it closer. Ooh. seems to me from what's showing on the recorder here that it's a similar kind of problem. It's dying away quite fast, although I'm still hearing it ringing. It's got quite a long sustain, this bowl. And also, I mean, I know that this bowl has actually got something like about 6 partials, or 6 notes in it, depending on how it's played. And I'm not sure it's going to be picking up and relaying all 6 of those to you as well, because some of them are quite high frequencies. But nevertheless, okay, sounds a bit muffled. Closer seems purer. Okay, so let me just try that again. So if I go from here, it seems to sustain a bit longer actually. Okay, well anyway, it's I suppose it's kind of what I suspected, which is that the sound isn't brilliant, but nevertheless, maybe the combination of some sound, particularly with the tapping, and the opportunity to demonstrate techniques is probably a good combination and is worth doing. I guess that's the kind of message I'm getting back. So it doesn't sound as if it's totally awful and is an affront to your sensitivity. So that's good. Great. Okay, so Bonnie's question was, what about, because I think Closer is much better. Sound on webcast has fuzzy background. Yeah, I might try and prop up the computer a little bit more next time, so that the fan is working a bit better and it's not maybe going to cut in so much. So that'll be another thing I'm going to try. All these little techniques help. Okay, that's really great. Thanks for your feedback. This is brilliant. And I think we're going to have some really great webinars as we go along. So, Bonnie, I suspect your question was more about a Tibetan bowl rather than a crystal bowl, because the crystal bowl plays generally at 1 note, and if you've got a tuner, you'll be able to pick that up. So it's probably more confused about what's happening with these Tibetan type bowls, Himalayan bowls, and how to make the notes, how to recognize the fundamental note on there. Because some of them, it's very clear, and some of them, it's true, there's a lot of notes going on, and it's quite difficult to tell what is the fundamental note. All of these bowls will have a variety of notes that they play, and some of those are quite obvious to hear, like a really low woo, 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 as well as the higher pitch ones. And so the key thing, because you were saying that was the word you used, the key signature, the key note, there's different ways of identifying it. One, and it always depends, the thing of, we're getting into the whole webinar here about Tibetan bowls, I don't really want to get into that, but just to stick with that, the surest way of telling the fundamental key note is to actually play it around the rim, either with a wand like this, with the suede, or you could use one with just the wooden, but ideally with a suede one for these bigger bowls. And whatever note, because that settles down much more clearly on 1 note. You haven't got so much ringing and so much variety of notes. So playing around the rim is one way of getting a fundamental note. The other way is to, if you tap it, is to wait and see which note kind of sustains for the longest and the clearest. What does it settle down as for the longest after it's been tapped for a few, and it's ringing for a few seconds, maybe even 15, 20, 30 seconds. So that'd be the key things. But the sound it makes and the notes that we'll make will depend on a lot of factors, like the wand you're using, as well as other things. So we'll come on to that more with the Tibetan bowl. Is that helpful? Hopefully that's helpful. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the instruments. I've got them all here, but I'm not going to practice them all just now. But I think it's been useful to get that feedback, so thank you. Okay. Oh yeah, so Bonnie was able to notice that it sings a different note than when it's chimed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, actually, the note that it's when it's played around the rim that it sings at is also the same. It's also there when it's chimed, but it's not so obvious because there's all these other notes going on as well. Great. Well, I think that's, is that it? Is that all the questions? Great, Bonnie said thanks. Yeah. Good. Okay. So I'm just gonna end, and like I started almost, connecting up with my heart energy, and I'm very grateful to you being here, to be taking part and giving me such great feedback, asking really good questions, and the fact that you're here listening in means a lot. And so thank you. And so I'm just going to end on using my voice, and if you want to, either silently in your mind, on your breath, or even out loud, you can join in your own way. And I'm just going to end by doing a simple chant with an om sound. Okay, so you can join in with me if you wish, or just listen. So, and then if you feel like it, you could just give me a final feedback and say, what does the sound of the voice sound like as I do the chant? Okay, so I know about that for future as well. But I'm going to just do the om, and then I'm going to. We'll be switching off soon after that. I'm not going to say any more. But anyway, thank you very much again for listening in. I look forward to seeing you, or you seeing me, next time. And in the meantime, keep going, keep working with the sounds, the inner and outer sounds. And I wish you all the best. Okay. Actually, that was quite interesting because I was just testing different sounds that I was making there. So maybe it didn't all sound brilliant, but I was just wanted to test something because I realized that, of course, I could see this, the effect on the microphone recording here if I kept my eyes open. And I noticed that some of the sounds were cutting out quite quickly again, particularly when I was sustaining the sound. And then also some of the sounds which I was like wavering a little bit there, some of those more wavering sounds also didn't come through very well. So that's useful. I've got some feedback already from that. Yeah. Okay, so Fiona was saying, love the interactive nature of this webinar. Thanks again very much. Oh, Bonnie, thank you. Okay, so the arm sounds okay. That's good. Thank you. Well, you're all very kind with your sounds. It wasn't a great sound of voice from my side. I was more just checking in with what different sounds would be like. So that's great. So thank you again for your feedback, and I'll get into using the voice a bit more, also particularly on the voice modules as well. So thank you again, and goodbye. God bless. And I wish you all well. Namaste. Okay. Thank you for your feedback, everyone. Computer's getting a bit hot. Time to turn it off. I'm going to stop now. Bye.